speaking of super corrupt process, sorry, I was looking for a segue into probably at this moment my least favorite cabinet member, Thom Price, who, I mean, like, this man made some. Martha Stewart went to jail seemingly for less than what this guy did and then lied about at his confirmation hearing. That's what it looks like to me. But right now, joining us by Skype is investigative journalist Sharona Coutts, who is doing did a great piece on Thom Price and has all sorts of information. Sharona, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here, Alex.
So I just opened with my dislike of Thom Price, and what looks to me like I've just never seen something like this. I watched a guy, I've seen like little tiny tax issues, which the people shouldn't have done, but I've seen that scuttle nominations before. Thom Price seemingly has much worse dealings going on here. Can you tell us about your piece, what you found out in this latest one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is amazing, isn't it? Sort of thinking back to, do you remember in 2000 and early 2009 when it was revealed that Tim Geithner, who was part of the Obama administration, had, I think, underpaid something like $20,000 worth of tax because he used TurboTax, and that almost derailed his nomination. I mean, we're definitely in a different time now. What I wrote about was sort of a continuation of the questions that have been raised about Thom Price, and in particular, his judgment. And I mean judgment both in the sense of his decisions while he was a member of Congress, sitting on powerful committees. But it turns out it's also about his judgment as an investor. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with the basic outlines of this story. What we know about Thom Price is that throughout the course of his career as a congressman, he, like many other members of Congress, used a broker to purchase stock in companies for him. The reason this became very interesting was because this broker bought a lot of stock in medical companies. And it turns out that Price, who is also an MD, then intervened via, letters that he wrote with fellow members of Congress, but also through his own staff, through his campaign and through his own office, writing letters, emails, making phone calls to various agencies within the Department of Health and Human Services, which he now leads, lobbying effectively or pushing back against rules and regulations that would either directly or indirectly affect the companies whose stock he had invested in. That obviously raises the question about whether he had a conflict of interest, which is to say, was he really writing those letters because he believed it was in the best interest of his constituents writ large and the American people, or because he believed it was in the narrow interest of those companies and therefore his own bank balance?
And it's not one instance, right? I mean, that's part of this, right? There's multiple instances. So it'd have to be a heck of a series of coincidences that it just, when he stands up and affirmatively acts that would help, a specific company, that it, just magically lined up his financial incentives with what he thought best represented, his constituents.
Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind for me, my former legal training, is pattern of conduct. When someone does something once, okay, you notice, but it does appear that there's a pattern of conduct here. The one investment, though, that really got a lot of attention and which I wrote about is different, because he didn't make it through his broker. He made it himself. So he doesn't have that plausible deniability, which he's been able to use with all these other trades, saying, yes, I did write this letter, but it was in the best interests of everyone. I really believe in the argument that I was making. And also, by the way, I didn't directly make that investment. My broker did, and I didn't instruct him to do it. But when it comes to one company, that's not an argument that he has available to him, because not only did he make the investment himself, but he did it through what's known as a private placement, which is it's almost like an investment by invitation in some ways. And he invested in this tiny little Australian startup called Innate Immunotherapeutics. And a private placement, it sounds like what's questionable about that is that it's sort of in private. What that really is, though, it's quite a standard investment mechanism. It's for wealthy individuals who can, frankly, afford to make an extremely speculative bet. Because they can afford to lose the money. So they're private as opposed to public, because when you have, stocks that the general public can invest in, they've been vetted. These ones are much riskier, and you have to be qualified. So you have to have a high income and high net worth, usually, to be eligible to make these. But what's really interesting about this investment is that it involved another member. Well, it was at the invitation, we are told, of another member of Congress, Chris Collins, who's actually a director of this company. But it was sort of a lot of high-powered US people, but most of all Thom Price, who made this investment. And the company itself, it's got one drug really under development, and it's very speculative at this point. They haven't even completed the sort of advanced clinical trials. In other words, they don't yet have a drug that's proven to work. If it does work, maybe it'll be $1 billion company. It's a drug that they're developing for treatment of advanced multiple sclerosis, which is a devastating disease. And there's only just recently started to be some drugs that look like they might help people with that condition. And it's really needed. People in that condition, it's really harrowing. And so in some ways, we hope that their drug does work. But at this stage, what's interesting about the company is that they don't have a drug that's ready to go to market, but they have said that their strategy is to get approved by the FDA and then get acquired by a big pharmaceutical company. And so I was interested in learning a little bit more about this company. And what I found out was that the people who run Innate Immunotherapeutics have pretty checkered records when it comes to other companies that they have been involved with. And in particular, two of the senior people running Innate Immunotherapeutics have had a really tough time with other medical companies who also wanted to get their products approved by the FDA. Now, of course, getting approved by the FDA is difficult and a lot of people fail. Also, in the startup world, people get sued all the time, particularly by investors who are disgruntled, they've lost their money, they're going to sue to see what they can get back. The court cases that I found, though, I'm told by investment experts, are a little bit different. They're not just the usual, okay, we thought we had a good drug, turns out it didn't work, we're all very disappointed, and now we're in a big legal fight. Rather, in both cases, there are real questions about serious misconduct on the part of these directors. In one case, in another Australian company, there's a current class action in the Federal Court of Australia where there are allegations that the directors of that company, one of whom is one of the top people at Innate Immunotherapeutics, that they had, in the case of that company, failed to tell the market that the process of going through the FDA wasn't going as well as they'd hoped. And at the same time as failing to disclose that, they kept coming back to the market and raising funds, and they raised almost 90 million Australian dollars. So when the FDA actually gave them a total rejection, and the company essentially, that was the beginning of the end for the company, when shareholders found out that for 2 years leading up to that, the directors just hadn't told them that things were not going as well as they believed, they considered that was a real ethical breach.
So Sharona, in the last 2 minutes here, all of that, I'm just laying out the coincidence here. All of that, and then it's just a coincidence that these two congressmen, one of whom now runs HHS, which the FDA is part of, but at the time he was a member of Congress who could weigh in and did weigh in on this process, right? So you'd have to just believe that that was a magical coincidence, that he was in a private placement of this company who basically it was a roll of the dice, and he reached in and tried to get it to land on the point.
Well, I have no evidence that he intervened on behalf of this particular company, but what is known is that Price and his office had directly contacted the FDA as recently as 2015 on behalf of another company, who appears to have been having some trouble with the approval process. So he definitely had a track record of doing that. It may be that we never find out whether he had ideas about perhaps doing the same thing on behalf of innate immunotherapeutic, and perhaps he didn't. And certainly I have no evidence to show that the directors of innate immunotherapeutics wanted him to do that.
Let me do this. I should have said this at the top, and we only have a few minutes in this segment. I want you to really nail exactly what you think your investigation shows, along with the rest of what I don't remember what your legal term was. I always think of the waiter who says he's pattern of conduct. The waiter who says he's bad at math, and so he gives the wrong tip. He gives the wrong amount of money back, but it's always in his favor. And so then you're talking to a thief, not someone who's bad at math. But when you finish this up in the last 3 minutes here, just make sure that you tell all of our listeners where they can find more information, when they can find your story, please.
Sure. We have to be very careful in terms of, whether I overstate what it is that we have found for sure. But certainly, keeping in mind this pattern of conduct, what we know about Thom Price is that over a series of years, while he was in public office, where his biggest duty is supposed to be to the American people and to his constituents in Georgia in particular, he also continued to have financial interests in companies whose future he could influence, and did try to influence on multiple occasions. And that seems to set up a clear conflict of interest. And whether or not he broke any laws in doing those things, it certainly raises enormous questions over his judgment, because you don't have to get yourself into that situation. When you're in public office, no one is forcing you to continue making investments in companies and then writing letters that could help those companies. No one's forcing you to do that. You've chosen to do all of those things. So regardless of whether he broke any laws, and perhaps he did, we might never know that for sure, because Preet Bharara, who was the US attorney in the Southern District, was reportedly investigating Price and these transactions in particular just before he was fired by President Trump. But whether or not we ever learn if Price violated criminal laws, what we do know is that he seems to have a reflex towards self-enrichment through his public office. And now he's even more powerful. And he's in an administration that seems bent on kleptocracy. He's in an administration that is almost like seeing a family business move into the White House.
Sharona, where can people find your reporting?
We're at rewire.news. We didn't get the .com.
Oh, man, I hate that. I hate that I said the wrong URL. Rewire.news.
Yeah, we're at rewire.news. Please come and have a read. We've got a lot of good reporting, not just on Price, but on a lot of issues like immigration in particular, and, of course, reproductive and sexual justice, rights, and politics.
Sharona, thank you so much for all of your work across Rewire.news. I obviously love this reporting on Thom Price. a reflex of self-enrichment is a very nice way of putting it. But I think that it's really clear that's what this man has. He sees his office as a way of making money, and he's willing to get really close to the line. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program, and we'll be right back after this.